Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Doug Tisdale, and I will be serving today as the chair for the MetroVision Issues Committee meeting here on April the 2nd at 4 o'clock at the DRCOG offices, because our chair, Boulder County Commissioner Elise Jones, is presently pursuing far more pleasurable activities than we are. And so we wish her well, and her sister is here to be able to pass on any appropriate notes to her when she sees her soon. I am advised that we have a quorum. We are in the process of circulating a sign-in sheet for all of you. Please to indicate your presence. And our first order of business is for a period of public comment. So we will open up the floor to anyone who wishes to address the MetroVision Issues Committee relative to any matters as to which we have not previously had a public hearing either before this group or the board of directors. But other than that, pretty much the sky is the limit. And to illustrate that point, it's my pleasure to recognize former Boulder County Commissioner Mr. Will Tour. Good afternoon, Mr. Tour.
Thank you very much. Great to be here today. Will Tour with the Southwest Energy Efficiency Project. And there's a few items that I wanted to briefly speak to.
Want to take your mic?
Rookies. I'll move over to here.
Hey, wait a minute.
So, first I wanted to support the recommendation that strategic corridors be removed from the MetroVision points process, and happy to discuss the history with anybody who's interested. But having lived through the multi-year battle over the Jefferson Parkway and then been part of the process of developing the intergovernmental agreement among a number of governments that helped to settle down that issue, where a number of communities agreed that they would not oppose the Parkway and would take a neutral position based upon the funding plan of the Parkway being funded through local dollars and toll dollars. I would just urge folks to err on the side of not reopening that issue. And since I don't think that the strategic corridors really brings much of great value to the Metro, to the process of evaluating tip corridors, I would recommend avoiding that issue by removing those corridors. The other thing I want to just very briefly speak to is the proposed updates to the 2035 plan. And this is I want to speak to C470, which I do. SWEEP does not have any opposition to including C470 in the updated 2035 plan. However, we do believe that at some point the board should have the broader discussion about the appropriate policy around high occupancy vehicles and transit in managed lanes. I know that this was brought up a few months ago and that the board is planning on having that conversation. Wanted to actually pass around an analysis that SWEEP just conducted looking at the demographics of the folks who use toll lanes in Colorado and of folks who are carpoolers and users of bus-based transit. And what we see is that on the existing I-25 express lanes, unsurprisingly, the demographics of those who are paying tolls are very highly weighted towards the upper end of the income scale. And I think that while there are great benefits to managed lanes, that we do need to assure that our investments serve the broad range of residents of the metro area, and that by including carpoolers and public transit in those lanes, as this analysis shows, we will serve a far broader segment of the population. So with that, thank you very much for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you very much, Will. Always a pleasure to see you and to hear your words of wisdom, and I think we will be having the opportunity shortly to address the merit of some of the comments that you have made, and we appreciate that. We now have we have another speaker, and I apologize. I was too busy looking down here. So please, if you would identify yourself and give us your thoughts.
Yes, I'm Gene Putman. I'm the transportation manager for the city of Thornton. There's one item on your agenda on criteria of the tip that I'd like to bring to your attention, and that is one of the bullets that says that you have to have your NEPA document done before you submit your project. I want to tell you that after 34 years is very cumbersome, because if you do it before you submit and don't get the project, you have just wasted all the money you put in to that NEPA document, because it has a shelf life. And what I mean by that is after 4 to 5 years, because DRCOG will go to the next planning horizon, then all the numbers change, and you'll have to go back and redo it. And I think for local governments, that is a problem when you put a project together to have it. You've got to be on this project 3 to 5 years ahead of time, and then not to be able to get the project, you can be detrimental to you, because your NEPA document could be worthless and you'd have to go back and totally redo it. So I like the aspect of it that says you can do it before construction within the tip years, but that piece that says before, I have major heartburn from a local engineer's perspective. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Putnam. And the committee members, the reference is to agenda item number 8, page 3 of the materials is where that is referenced. Are there any other public comments at this time? Hearing none, we'll move on with the balance of the agenda. Item number 3, you have before you a summary of the March 5, 2014 meeting. It's not presented in the form of minutes, but rather a summary of that meeting. We do offer the opportunity, if anyone has any comments, questions or corrections or issues that they feel need to be addressed prior to that summary becoming a part of the permanent record for DRCOG, please feel free to comment on that now. Any comments? No comments. We'll move on to the action items. Agenda item number 4 is the motion to recommend to the Board of Directors proposed amendments to Metro Vision 2035. That is attachment B in your packets. If you will turn to attachment B, in looking at the summary, you will note that, and the materials, if you have pulled them up, we have a summary of proposed amendments to MetroVision Cycle 2 2013. There are 3 urban center amendments that are proposed. They relate to a portion of downtown Littleton, and Mayor Sonanek is here. They relate to the original Broomfield Urban Center expansion, a revision, and they relate to I-25, State Highway 7 Urban Center expansion. As to those 3 items, you will note, please, in the materials attached, that the evaluation panel has reviewed and recommended those. You will note that DRCOG staff similarly has reviewed and recommends those. Those are the urban center changes. The second part of these proposed amendments relates to rural town centers designation, and specifically it would change the designation from an area of less than 2 square miles of urban area to an area of less than 3 square miles of urban area. The background and history is provided for you in the memorandum. Essentially, you will recall, some of you may recall that in 2004, we had a significant extended discussion. I was here back then and remember that, relative to the modification of the urban growth boundary/area. In fact, that's when we first started using UGB/A as a designation for the urban growth area. And at that time, we made changes to the overall urban growth boundary/area, but we did not at that time make any changes to the rural town center designation. Staff has recommended that now, some 10 years later, it would be appropriate for us to catch up with that and to make those changes. So those are the proposed amendments. Brad is here, able to present and discuss on this, but I wanted to tee this up so you'd have some general idea of the two natures of the amendment relative to the urban centers, 3 of them reviewed and approved by the evaluation panel and by staff, and then secondly, the rural town center criteria. Brad.
I think you did a great job of covering almost everything. The one thing that I would add is on the urban centers, the way that that process is set up, NVIC actually takes an initial action early in the process. So back in November, this group provided direction to, recommended to the board, who then provided direction to staff to model those urban centers to understand the impacts, as we do with our transportation amendments as well. So in some ways, you've taken initial action to approve or recommend those, and so this is sort of your final step to recommend those for inclusion within the MetroVision plan.
Are there questions for staff? Yes. I'm sorry. Suzanne Jones.
Well, I was just curious if you could refresh me. So how many rural town centers do we have, and where do they fall along the spectrum of size? Like, how many are we affecting? Just to educate us on exactly the implications of what we're doing.
Sure. There are, give or take, a dozen or so rural town centers that are designated in the plan, and I think the chair did a good job of describing kind of why this change is happening. In the 2004 time frame, when those rural town centers were initially designated, we had, give or take, 750 square miles of future urban growth boundary or urban growth area. Over the years, that amount has increased largely due to definitional and mapping changes. How you define urban obviously changes how the mapping works out. And so we were just sort of going through that designation criteria recently and realized, well, we haven't touched this in a decade. And we've had a significant increase, and so it made sense to have a proportional increase in that maximum UGB that can be associated with a rural town center. So really, everyone that's currently designated a rural town center would remain a rural town center. This ultimately doesn't really change much. It just gives the opportunity for increased UGB in some of these communities, consistent with that overall regional increase.
Okay, and is this something they want, I assume?
Yes, I would think so, yes.
Well, I mean, that's what I mean. It's like, okay.
I think Mayor Sue Horn from Bennett would certainly be one who would be able to speak for some of our rural town centers and express approval of that.
Well, at least that last piece, I mean, that we have been discussing that for a while, because when you're really small, it doesn't take much. 10% isn't much of 6 miles, as opposed to some of the larger ones. So, yeah, we'd be in favor of that.
All right, other questions for staff? Mayor Sarnanek?
No question. Are you entertaining a motion?
Yes, I would be happy to entertain a motion.
Okay, I move to recommend to the Board of Directors the proposed amendments to MetroVision 2035 with regard urban centers and rural centers.
We have a motion by Mayor Sarnanek. Is there a second? I have a second from Val Vigil. Is there any further discussion on that motion? Hearing none, all those in favor, please indicate by saying aye. Aye. Are there any opposed? There are none. That passes unanimously. Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, we have an opposed. One opposed. Okay. All right.
Just kidding.
That was yesterday. You could get away with that. This is the 2nd of April. All right. We turn now to agenda item number 5, and that is found at attachment C, and this relates to the fiscally constrained 2035 MetroVision Regional Transportation Plan, the 2035 MVRTP. You will see in the memo that is the summary document for the public hearing, if you had a chance to open that up, that it actually breaks out and it describes them as 3 different groups of projects. Here, in looking at the summary memo, you'll note that we've kind of jumped some of those together, but you have regionally significant roadway projects of 2 types. There's the CDOT ramp projects. That's the first 4 that are listed there, and they show ramp at the end of the line. The next 2 are local government projects, and they are the Brighton project and the Centennial project. And then the third one is the rapid transit projects relative to the North Metro rail line and the I-225 rail line. For purposes of summarizing, you will note that the staff memorandum references the summary document for the public hearing. The summary document does reflect that there is a neutral financial impact associated with these proposed amendments that will in fact be the subject of a public hearing at our board meeting on April the 16th. You will also note that there is a conclusion that all of the projects passed the air quality conformity tests, and the documents supporting that conclusion are similarly attached to both this summary memo as well as the summary document for the public hearing. And other referral materials are here before you. And I believe we have Jacob, who has recovered from my trying to knock him down while he's walking around with his foot in a cast, to present to us now. Good afternoon, Mr. Rigger. How are you, sir?
Well, I would also like to thank the chair for doing my work for me. I think that was an excellent summary. I would only add just a couple of things. As with the MetroVision amendments, the board took an initial action back in November to approve the network that we will use for modeling that includes these projects. As the chair indicated, since that time we have done the transportation modeling and the air quality conformity modeling on all of these proposed amendments, and we did pass the air quality conformity modeling. The chair also mentioned the public hearing on April 16th, meaning that we are right now within the 30-day public comment period. We are asking for a recommendation from MVIC to the board to approve the proposed amendments themselves and the positive air quality conformity test outcomes of those amendments. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
I think this is a fine list. But I have a question for former that Will Tour raised about HOV lanes for C470. Could you speak to that issue and whether the appropriateness of us maybe weighing forth on that? Maybe Jennifer can.
Perhaps the executive director would like to address that comment.
Yeah, I've gone back and listened to that conversation that we had here at MVIC, and the discussion, as I understand it, was that once we got through cycle 2, then staff would come back with some recommendations on how to handle this going forward. We're aware that there's a lot of different studies out there. Different roadways work in different ways. Funding plans come together different ways, et cetera. So staff, after cycle 2 amendments were through, we're going to turn their attention to coming up with some data, research information, and bring back bring that back to you, and then you could continue to discuss whether or not you wanted to adopt a policy or not.
So in summary, is it fair to say that the issue is fairly presented to staff? Staff is aware of it, aware of the research that Will Tour has brought to our attention, and will, I am certain, continue to bring to our attention as the months and years go by.
I can't speak to Will, but I can speak to the rest.
Yeah. Commissioner Hilbert.
Yep, I would also like to point out that there are other studies that also show alternatives based upon the demographic situations within different types of corridors, communities, and regions that show a difference in how that writing. One recent one that was studied that showed how it is more and more and more seems to be that people were getting single car occupancies. No matter what you try to do, you're not getting them out of their vehicles, and what that study seems to imply. And I just think that at, we need to consider all studies from all corridors, from all demographic environments, and so that what we can do is take those into consideration whenever we begin to reach that HOV, whatever status or policy question, and not try to create. I believe there is a huge, and we need to think about that when we get down that road, that there's a huge problem trying to paint everybody the same on this particular issue. Corridors are different, demographics are different, cultural aspects are different, and we need to treat them as such.
Councilor Jones, you had another comment?
Well, just, it makes sense. I agree with Jack. We should look at everything. Will we have an opportunity, you think, if we look further into this issue, to circle back to road projects such as C-470 and give the benefit of whatever future policy we adopt or do not adopt to those projects?
No, just kidding.
Or is this a chance that won't come again, is I guess my question.
Yes, Executive Director.
The conversation, as I recall, honestly, it's been about 6 weeks since I last listened to that conversation, but as I recall, staff was going to bring back information that it collected from a variety of studies that had been done around the country, and you all would have a discussion as to, one, whether or not you would adopt the policy. So I would assume if you adopt a policy, it would be at that time that you would also have a discussion as to how it would be applied.
All right. Further questions or discussion from the members of the committee? Actually, I'm sorry.
I was just going to make a motion.
Please. Actually, but can I first, I just want to say I was expecting Councilor Vigil at some point to give us an attaboy because we have the North Metro rail line. Okay, all right, thank you. Okay, I'm sorry. Now, Mayor Pro Tem Millay.
I would like to propose we accept the staff recommendation for the approval of the 2013 Cycle 2 amendments to the 2035 MVRTP.
I have a motion from Mayor Pro Tem Millay. I have a second from Mayor Kathy Noon. Is there any further discussion? Is there any discussion on that motion? Hearing none, all those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Are there any opposed? There are none. That passes unanimously. Thank you. We turn now to agenda item number 6. That is found at attachment D in your materials. This relates to the 2040 Regional Transportation Plan. These are, for the sake of those in the audience who might not know, although probably most of them are far more educated even than the members of this committee. These are the long-range projects that we're addressing here. They are not the TIP projects. You will recall that we had occasion to discuss this at our last meeting, and you will recall that this was also before the board at the March 19th meeting. In that time since that board meeting, the TAC has had an opportunity to look at these issues again and would like to direct our attention specifically to what we have called the gap closure criteria. If you look in your materials at Table 1, you'll see the project scoring evaluation criteria for the 2040 TIP. Item number 3 in that table is the gap closure item. The way that item reads now, and if you'll notice there's the left-hand side is the criteria category, the right-hand side, or the middle, if you will, is the point distribution process. You will recall at our meeting at MVIC last month, we had some extended discussion about the length of the gap, and we ended up leaving that alone. There was a motion made to make it 3 miles. It was left at 5 miles. However, there is some concern on the part of staff and on the part of the TAC relative to the left column, the criteria category, because specifically it deals with a gap in the number of lanes on an existing roadway. And staff has provided us, if you look at Figure 1 that follows Table 1, they actually have provided an illustration of 3 specific examples of new roads that if we leave the language as we ended up amending it, we would cut out any opportunity for those roads to receive points. And so staff is now before us on the recommendation of the TAC, asking us to reconsider. And so I believe that Mr. Steve Cook will now lead us in the discussion relative to this matter. Good afternoon, Mr. Cook.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much. And this will also be pretty brief because that was a perfect introduction. And I'm just going to highlight a couple of things here. As noted in your packet is a map showing 3 examples of projects that are on our board-designated regional roadway system. This is the future regional roadway system that's been defined, and that future system includes existing roads that are already here today, and it includes new roads that will have to be built in the future. And 3 of those new roads that, when money appears, that will have to be built are Colorado Boulevard Extension, Martin Luther King Boulevard Extension, and also 6th Avenue or 6th Parkway, I forget the actual title of that, in Aurora. These are ones that under the approved language that the board approved last month would not receive any points. And a proposal is, if you are interested in making these eligible as they once were, for the last 3 plan cycles, these would have received points. And we would suggest going back to the language that we used to have up here in red, and that's the language that was used for the regional transportation plan for 2 or 3 cycles for the last 10 years, was you can get gap closure points if you complete all or part of either a lane gap, you know, if you go from 4 lanes to 2 lanes to 4 lanes, and you complete that gap, you can get points. Or if it's a segment gap, there's a missing segment, and that's what these examples in the map are. Those are segments that are missing, that in essence would be new construction to fill those in. Those would get the points. You know, with this statement here, this simple 10-word statement that we had previously for the last 3 RTP cycles. So that is one staff idea.
Right. So the staff recommendation, therefore, is to change one element only in Table 1, Project Scoring Evaluation Criteria for 2040 RTP, under item number 3, to cross out the existing language you see on your sheets before you that was as modified at our last meeting, and go back to that which served us well for a period of over 10 years. So are there questions for staff? Mayor Horn.
No, I was going to make a motion.
Please, Mayor Horn, proceed.
Because I wasn't really clear on why we had to futz with this to begin with. And so I move that we accept staff's recommendation and change the wording to their recommended wording for gap closure.
Second. I have a motion from Mayor Horn, a second from Commissioner Hilbert. Is there any discussion on that motion? Yes, Councilor Jones.
Since I caused part of the problem.
All the problem.
All the problem.
No.
Man.
Please.
Can't wait for my twin to get back so she can take some of this point. No. The intent was not to stop these 3 road segments. The idea was simply to, just so people don't think we're crazy, was to maximize points that we give for connectors to things that really connect versus new roads which should compete as new roads, and to make a distinction rather than to blur that, because a connector of 5 miles starts to sound a lot like a new road. So that was the intent. But we didn't go with shortening the gap, which I think would have made more sense. So we went with the existing. So anyhow, I'll just leave this one alone. But that was the rationale, just so people remember.
All right. Well, which we appreciate your being able to supplement the record and provide further edification to us all. I'm sorry, I can't say edification. Somebody's going to. Okay. Yes. Councilor Robin Knish.
Thank you very much. We had asked this question, I don't know, since you now have 3 examples. Do you know what the distance or length of these 3 is?
They're both roughly a mile or a little more, a mile and a half.
Did you guys, because one of the questions we had was, would we be losing anything if we went from 5 to 3? So I don't think we have to re-debate that, but seeing as TAC had the discussion, I was just curious if you all talked about that, whether there's additional gaps that you're aware of in the 4-mile range.
Yes, there are gaps longer. There are gaps shorter. This is just the 3 examples of
Right.
things that would be a new road.
Segments. The
Right, new
segment
segments.
word. Okay,
correct.
thanks.
Yeah, new segments. So we're good.
Further discussion on the motion. Councilor Roth.
I think this probably has the support to move forward, but just in case, I wanted to mention that specifically the 6th Avenue Parkway, this is the main entry to Buckley Air Force Base, and not having that connection to E-470 is a huge detriment to the people that it is a very, very huge regional economic engine for the entire area, so that's a huge detriment. If the money, again, appears someday, that this would be able to be part of the consideration is very big.
Thank you. Commissioner Hilberg.
Yeah, I just want to say that I plan on definitely we will support this. And the one that really stands out to me that's glaring is MLK. I mean, Martin Luther Boulevard. It's really got a situation where the road dead ends, and if you really want to reconnect from a regional perspective, you got to drive back all the way around, and it's crazy because there's not a runway in the way anymore. So we can really make that segment connection. That's a perfect example of what. And the thing is, it's not 2 endpoints. It just needs to dead end, and it needs to complete the connection to Peoria is what it needs to do. So.
Further discussion? Further discussion? Any further discussion? All right, then it sounds like we are ready for a vote on the motion. And the motion is to approve the substitution of language as previously read into the record. All those in favor, please indicate by saying aye. Aye. Are there any opposed? There are none. That passes unanimously. Thank you very much. We turn now to agenda item number 7. This is attachment E in your packets. And as to agenda item number 7, this relates to the 2016-2021 Transportation Improvement Program, the TIP. And essentially, this is the question. This is what we call the 2-pot TIP approach. Would you, in fact, like to pursue the 2-pot TIP approach that we talked about last time, or would you not? And the idea is, if you have pot 1 for the regional projects and then pot 2 for locally selected projects, you definitely can do that, but staff has advised that we need to make a determination to that effect today. This committee needs to decide that today because it will entail additional work and additional MVIC meetings to work out the details and the process for proceeding in that manner. And so with that as introduction, I'll turn it over to Doug Rex. Good afternoon, Mr. Rex.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Fabulous. We appreciate the tee up for this discussion today. And he is correct. I mean, last month we did present a conceptual TIP process that was really a departure from the way we've done things in the past. And Seattle came up quite a bit because that is one of the communities that is using this regional pot. So I have some additional information with regards to the Seattle process that I thought I'd share with you. But just to refresh your memory, and those who were not here last time, our current process is, we do a call for project. Well, our TIP process, we first set aside certain programs. And we'll actually have a larger discussion about this, the set-aside in the next agenda item. But we do set aside those, and we also have an area for other commitments, which is primarily, for this TIP purposes, it's first and second commitments of fast tracks primarily. And then once we set those aside, we take those off the top, then we do a call for projects for the remainder of the money. Excuse me. And we go to first phase selection, which represents about 75% of the funding that's available. And like projects, they compete against each other. So roadway capacity projects compete, roadway operations projects compete against each other, and so forth. And the projects that are not selected in first phase, they then go to second phase. And that's approximately 25% of the dollars. And all projects compete for that 25%. And we consider other factors. I say we, I mean you, consider other factors such as equity and the like. So that is the current process. And then we talked about, well, what if we were to remove the first and second phase and went to, well, I'll say it, we stir the pot and decide to have two pots, so a regional pot and a locally selected pot. What would that look like? And so we had a discussion about that real quick. And so what I wanted to show you today is what the Seattle or Puget Sound Regional Council's process is in selecting projects. And it's very similar in a lot of respects. They're actually just going through their call for projects right now, through the evaluation of projects. They finished the actual call. And they also have a set-aside. They have a set-aside for bike ped projects, which they represents 10% of the total funding that they have available for their call. They set aside money for system preservation, for road maintenance, and that's 25% of their total metro money, their STP money. And they also set aside a little bit of money for Kitsap County, which is outside the air quality non-attainment area. So it was a bit of an equity issue. They felt where all the CMAQ money was going to be spent within the area, that they'd set aside a little bit of STP money, STP Metro money for Kitsap. So once they set aside that money, this all looks familiar, I'm sure, they do a call for projects. And this is where it really differs from anything that we've done in the past. And they really separate that funding, 50%, they split the remaining money, 50% to countywide pot and a 50% to the regional pot. The countywide pot, actually before I get to that, let me just click one more time here. What's really unique, which I thought was really unique anyway, that set aside money, they actually, 100% of that money is also allocated to the countywide pot for their consideration. There's 4 counties within the Puget Sound region. There's King County, Kitsap, Pierce, and I hope I pronounced this right, Snohomish County. What Steve said? What? Snohomish County. Yeah, that's just right. And it's proportionately given to those countywide calls based on population and what have you. And then on the regional pot, they set aside an additional $3 million for other commitments, in particular for rural town centers and corridors. And that's really an opportunity for rural. It's I won't say seed money, but it's money to help the rural communities assist with the development of their town centers. Some additional information on the countywide. I should say, first of all, they've been using this process since 1995, so they're quite proficient in how they're doing this. And each countywide process all begins with this regional forum. They create a regional forum, and all the decisions that are made on the project selections come from that forum. And that forum is made up primarily of county and local staff, primarily at the public works type level, where they make recommendations, and that recommendations, before it goes to the Puget Sound Regional Council, has to be approved by the appropriate elected body. And it depends on the county, to be quite honest, what exactly that is. Some have countywide regional councils, for example, or maybe simply just go to through the county government process. So it's very unique, and they have full well, I was going to say they have full authority to do what they want in establishing their criteria. It's not really true, but they must still focus on what the policy framework is of the entire regional focus. It's kind of like our MetroVision. They must still comply with the components of their MetroVision. Might leave it there for now. But the other thing I should mention, which is certainly different than us, that the funds that can be spent on any federally functionally classified roadway, but it must be in reference and must reference and support centers and corridors that that serve those centers. I'll talk about that a lot more right here. And on the regional project side, the counties are again actively involved in the selection of these projects. They actually only accept a total of 36 projects that they review on the regional scale. So the whole concept, the whole intent is to look at very high priority projects. And so they have 36, 6 from each of the 3 counties that are mentioned there. They have 12 from King County, which of course is the largest county in the region, and then 2 additional ones from each of the Washington DOT, their regional transit agency, and the Puget Sound Clean Air Agency. And so the question was last time, how do they define regional projects? And it's very different, and I've talked to staff up there about their process, but they really exclusively define the regional projects are those that support and benefit regional growth centers. Regional growth centers or regional manufacturing and industrial centers, or the corridors that serve those centers. And that's it. They have a very open-ended process. The questions that they ask are very open-ended. They do have there is some technical analysis that's done, but primarily it's a goodness of fit of those projects and ultimately their benefit to those regional centers. And I'll just show you a picture of, their centers that may look, somewhat similar to what we have. And, these are the regional centers that they have. I know you probably can't see that, but you get some feel for what they are. The orange are the regional growth centers, and the green is the manufacturing and industrial centers. If I may, I might just slip back to this countywide one again and just mention to you that in the selection of projects at the countywide level, they also have the focus on those corridors, but they also have the opportunity to broaden that definition, to include locally designated centers as well. So there is some room there is some room or latitude. That's really all I had. Now the question, is there any questions about the Seattle process? I try to keep it as high level as I could. I didn't want to get into the weeds.
Questions? Let's start with Mayor Sarnanek, and then Todd, did you have your hand up? Or no, I'm sorry. Okay, Councilor.
Sorry. Doug, in there it says on your second large bullet point, second small bullet point within that says establish evaluation criteria. Do you have any idea what they're using within, say, that county to support those centers and corridors? And then also if you could comment on how much their geography with the lakes and all of that impacts how they can look at those corridors connecting things.
Well, that's a good question. I don't know the answer to the second. The first, and I'll actually hand this out, it's a little summary of what the process is for each county. It's very good. I think the information they had online was fantastic. So I'll pass that around to you. It might be easier to explain than not. But they do. I mean, each process is very unique. King County being the largest probably has the most extensive and just comprehensive process, but the others are quite good. I think it obviously it serves them well. But I was surprised to also learn from staff that they, although there is, the countywide project is really directed from within. The Puget Sound Regional Council staff is very hands-on in helping and providing staff support for the projects that go forward.
Okay. Councilor Kanish.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Couple questions. Can you go back to the picture? That one, yes. So you've described the countywide pot. There's a rural town center and corridor set aside. So when we looked at that map, what we didn't see is there's money flowing to some rural town centers.
Right.
That map. But what's going on in the regional pot other than that rural town center piece?
Other than that, it's
Yeah.
yeah, it's basically this.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, there's 36 total on the regional call. There's 36 total, and those projects come at the recommendation of those of the counties.
I got it. So do they come through these forums? Do they come from that other pot, the same forum? So the forum on one side makes actual determinations for things within the pot?
Yes.
But then they also endorse applications that compete in the other pot.
That's exactly
Is that right? Okay.
Correct.
And then just say a word if you know about the applicants. So these are all catchment areas that are counties, but the applicants can be cities. I mean, Seattle's in King County, for example. So I'm just
Yes,
talk to me about that.
Yeah, the applicants are the cities within that county.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
You know, just one last question. Do you know if they have any cities like ours that are in more than one county that extend? It might be really helpful to know how they handle that, because I think that anytime we're dealing with, ways to think about things, we run into the Westminster Aurora challenge, and I'm just curious if
Sure, we
they've
can find
figured
that
out
out.
how to do that.
No,
Thanks.
certainly, we can find that out.
Yeah. And I think Steve is indicating that perhaps there are some that you're.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, within King County, yeah.
So I think there may be some of that, but that's a good question.
Thanks.
Mayor Pro Tem Malay.
Kind of along those lines, as much as I love my county commissioner, and I do, Jack, it seems like a lot of the power in this process, for lack of a better word, is going to the counties, and I'm wondering, if I was a county, I'd be all in. But as I'm just a lowly city, I'm curious the role that the cities do play in this process in Seattle, and if you know that. And that's a question I'd like to have an answer to, but then I'd also like to make a comment that this is how it works in Seattle, but it doesn't mean necessarily we can have our local level projects done by the full DRCOG board if we chose to. So we could have this regional, countywide and regional, I feel like I'm mixing them up, but the larger DRCOG regional projects, we could have a set-aside pool of money for that, and criteria for that. And then we could also, it's my understanding, have all of the projects, the regional projects, compete with each other and not at the county level, right? I just want to make that point. But if you could answer my question about the city's role in this process, I'm curious.
Yes, every city within that countywide forum has representation on that forum, as well as it also the forum makes recommendation as to the projects in the countywide pot, and then that the ultimate recommendation or approval for admittance to Puget Sound Regional Council comes from an elected body, which also in most cases has representation of the various communities. Because they're a little unique there. They actually have, within their counties, they have regional councils as well, with representation.
And just as I guess what I'm concerned about is that, look, if I was a county, where the votes are. The bigger cities and municipalities in the county are going to get more money than, like, the community with 12,000 people in it. Not that that would ever happen in my county, but just potentially, the county commissioners are up for election. They're going to get more votes in one community versus another. So I still don't quite understand how that's prevented in this process.
Okay. Councilor Vigil.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I think that with all these questions and comments that are going around, I think that our task here today is to make a determination whether we're going to change or not. My recommendation at this point is that it's too complicated for us to sit down and make the decision now. I think we're too close to the TIP process and so forth, and I think we just need more time to discuss this and a lot more items to research than just make a decision at this particular point.
Thank you. Appreciate that. I think that's a point well taken. Commissioner Hilbert.
Val, I would just say trust the counties. Just kidding.
Oh, that decides that issue. Commissioner Rozier.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to point out, I know with the last NVIC meeting I wasn't here, and there was a lot of discussion on strategic corridors. And I just want to point out, too, in this map, and being very familiar with this plan and this area, when you look at corridors, strategic corridors up there are not necessarily roads. They're ferryways. If you look at pontoon planes, they're defined strategic corridors. So it's how you view corridors and how you look at it, and it's what links urban centers, rural or urban center town centers with another. That's the definition of it. So just keep in mind, you keep seeing these corridors serving centers. Keep in mind, they're corridors. Many things happen in those corridors.
Executive Director. And then Councilor Jones.
Well, I'd kind of like to wrap all of this discussion up. As you can see, there are a lot of questions, and we just talked about one MPO that's doing something very different than we are. And in fact, the reason we're even talking about this is we have been talking about how do we make this TIP process simpler, and this was a suggestion that was tossed out. As Doug pointed out in the beginning of his presentation, and your questions on this one process, and to Val's point as well, a lot of questions. So that means a lot more time to figure out if you have a regionally significant pot and you have a local pot, what's regionally significant? What can compete in for those dollars? How do you divide up the money? What's the split? These guys split it 50-50. I'm not sure that that would necessarily be the way that you would want to split it. How would these local decisions be made? How would the money be distributed? Because we have issues where cities do cross county boundaries, where we have cities and counties within the, or we have communities that are cities and counties. I think the recent discussion about a statewide sales tax for transportation and the more local discussions about distribution of funds, many of you are familiar with those, and you understand that these were questions that a group of really smart people were struggling with, and that wasn't even real money at the time, and this is really real money. These monies are available. So figuring out all of these questions is going to take time, and it wouldn't just be staff time. In order to meet the deadline to adopt the TIP, we would have to have additional MVIC meetings, and that's why it's critical that you make a decision today. And honestly, I tend to agree with Val. There's an awful lot of work to get done between now and the time we have to adopt a TIP to go a different way. It's not to say we can't do it. I'm just letting you know that our staff, DRCOG, your staff as well, and your own time is going to be needed to get all that work done and make all these decisions and make recommendations to the board and so on in order to adopt on time.
I have Councilor Jones first and then Mayor Horn.
I was wondering, can you put back the slide of how things are now?
How they are now?
Yep. So right now we just do the two phases.
Yes.
And so, Jennifer, you're recommending we sort of stick with this. That's the staff recommendation? Since
I really, honestly, I think that if you look at the TIP and you look at all the projects in the TIP, probably, not unlike Puget Sound, probably somewhere less than 40 of those, I would say closer to 30, are what most people in this room would agree are regionally significant. And most of the others are what I would say very, very localized, and people don't, around the table, unless you live in that community or in that area, you don't know what these projects are. So from that point of view, I think that this is a really intriguing option for the board to consider, but I do agree with Val that, boy, time is really short, and these are big decisions that have to be made in just a matter of a few months. So my recommendation for this TIP cycle is that you continue down the path that we've been on, but I would also suggest that you direct staff to look into this further. We have talked with a lot of our peer agencies across the country. You know, no one does this the same way, because as long as you follow some pretty minimal federal rules, the feds are good, so you can pretty much make it whatever you want it to be. But I think that if you look at what we're funding now, and if that's the way the board anticipates continuing to fund projects, then I would say, yes, let's go for something simpler. Let's not put the board in the middle of having commissioners on one end of the region, for example, making decisions about a pedestrian facility in at a completely other end of the region that really doesn't have regional significance or impact on their citizens.
And just one other question.
Follow up?
In terms of, given the vagaries in federal funding and this, putting aside set-asides, not knowing what the total is, I'm just curious, would these be considered going forward targets, or I'm just worried about we may not know what our future amounts are, so when we divide things up beforehand, not knowing what the ultimate amount is, if this, well, anyhow, can you just address
well, and
how
that's
we might
actually
approach
kind
that?
of the next item on your agenda.
Oh, okay.
We're kind of making the we couldn't not assume some things in order to have you prepared for this meeting. So these are numbers for right now, and you're right. We don't know. We haven't received from CDOT our numbers. We don't really know exactly what we're dealing with yet. So this is based on how you've made allocations in the past, assuming that funding isn't going to change that much for this TIP cycle.
It has been suggested that there is no force so great as an idea whose time has come. I would suggest the inverse is also true. Mayor Horn.
So I just wanted to make a comment, not for discussion this evening because it would open up a whole another can of worms, but for me, the issue wasn't so much the scoring, which we're still doing a similar scoring plan. We're just adjusting the points around a little bit. The issue for me was the non-flexibility of the program once we had finalized the TIP. And I'm hoping that's still going to be part of our discussion at some later date. In other words, so we finalized the TIP, we figured out how it's all laid out, and then we get money back. That's what I think really gave us the world's most heartburn, because then all bets were off. We couldn't figure out how we awarded it. Do we go back to the projects that were already in the hopper? Do we do a new call for projects? I think we have to have some sort of real-time process that allows for those unfunded projects to be updated on a timely fashion, so that if something like this happens, what we're looking at is a real list of projects that we ought to be considering if additional money's back. So that, again, I don't want to talk about that tonight because that's probably a long discussion, but I don't want to lose sight of that.
Okay. Councilor Beal.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If it's appropriate, I'd like to make a motion that we go ahead and maintain the current process that we have now and direct staff to for the future to take a look at some different methods of doing that. And I think that Mayor Horn identified one of the problems. I think that what we need to do is we need to identify what the problems are with our current program plan that we have now and see how we can correct that. I don't like to have change just for the mere process of change. If it corrects the problem, then yes. So with that, I just make a motion that we maintain the same project.
We have a well-stated motion. Is there a second? We have a second. We have a motion by Councilor Vigil and a second by Mayor Sloan. Any discussion on the motion, which, as I understand it, is to, for the present, maintain the process as it exists and instruct staff to continue its exploration of alternatives as have been identified to us this evening and as they have further information to report back to this body. That's the motion. First, I'll recognize Councilor Kanation, then Mayor Cernanek.
So just a couple thoughts. One, we're restarting some governance conversation, and I think that the conversation, this is not, I'm going to support the motion, but I don't think we completed the discussion totally, so consider these like the and don't forget. I think that I think we were getting to this with Jackie's question, but this isn't about county commissioners controlling. It's about a body convened at the county level. And so I think that that's a governance body that exists that makes the tip selection process possible that they use. And so I would suggest that, you know, these are the kinds of questions that actually should begin in the governance conversation, which is, do we want all decisions made by 56 member boards? Or do we want, 56 member jurisdictions, 57 people, but, or do we want there to be a series of different kinds of decision making, right? Do we want a general assembly and then, an executive committee, or do we want, some caucuses of different sized things? So I just want to remind folks that, to me, that governance conversation is what would make more sensible, more manageable tip selection possible. And so to me, the two are very related. So that's one point I wanted to just make. And the second is more of a question. I just want to clarify the motion. Remind me, we have not yet made the decision about the exact percentage going in pot 1, pot 2, and nor have we made, those decisions about the kind of projects at each level. So all we're really saying is there's a phase 1, phase 2 of some sort and so is that correct? Right? So we still, and then I don't have my master calendar in front of me, I'm sorry. When is it that we'll be discussing some of the allocations within that? I know we have set-asides coming up in our next item, but the red, the bottom half, right? When on our schedule are we discussing that?
We're going to begin the discussion in the next item about phase 1 and the 75%. We've kind of concluded. That's great. We're going to start having that discussion now.
Okay, I didn't see anything about that in the memo on item 8.
No, there was nothing specifically about the percentages, but we're going to start that discussion about the selection of project types in phase 1.
Okay, again, I don't see anything about that in the memo, so that's concerning if we're talking about something that wasn't in the memo, but or in the materials. So I'll wait and get there. But I'm going to be concerned if we're talking about something that we didn't get advance notice.
No, we're not. We're not going to talk about the breakdown of 75% in phase 1 versus.
Or the subcategories of phase 1. We have not set, for example, and this is where I guess I was going to say, we're not talking about changing. So if we say yes to Val's motion, we haven't changed who the decision-making body is or the structure, but we certainly still could have a discussion about the types of project pools we create, for example, in phase 1. And one of the things that, even if the decision makers don't change, if we have more like projects competing against like projects in scale, for example, or rural, we could do the Puget Sound rural set-aside in our phase 1 selection if we wanted to. We wouldn't be changing who the decision makers were, but I just want folks to know that we could steal ideas from that even without changing our structure. That's kind of the point I'm getting to, slowly and painfully, sorry. But so that's not foreclosed yet.
No, it is not.
Okay, great, thanks.
Thank you. And I think the Executive Director has advised that, excuse me, essentially that's a process that continues through the summer as we get more information from CDOT, we get the numbers, we get the breakdown, and that will be coming back to the board over the course of the summer. And the motion, as I understand it, entails a continuing analysis by staff relative to this process, none of which precludes staff's being informed by the same and therefore helping to implement our current process in a more efficient and effective manner. Mayor Cernanek.
And equitable. Actually, Robin had part of the question, which is we haven't decided on the percentages. Also, the one note that I'd like to have that kind of steps into the next piece, which is around set-aside. What I liked is using percentages rather than dollar amount as it shows up in our suggestion, in part because we don't know what the size of the total pool is, and as we may go through it, it may be a better consideration to be looking at percentages rather than dollar amounts. And I didn't quite understand the other commitments in the current tip and how that carries over. So before, I'd just like to have a clarification on that, recognizing we've kind of clarified that in the pools, they're there, but the one that I am still a little fuzzy on is
right
this,
here.
yeah, that other commitments pool, to say, okay, because that's where it kind of might be, but I don't know where that comes from.
Right. Well, really what this is monies that's basically already been programmed, and it's first and second commitment of fast tracks, which this board approved that commitment, as well as I think there was one additional project. There was a bike ped project in Boulder, I think, wasn't it? In Lyons that is included in this. That was moved to phasing in the next tip.
So it's other commitments would be fast track requirements and a bike ped project.
Correct.
So, and that's the $27 million that's there. So that one does have a dollar amount. That's why I was trying to say if there's, then we take that off and everything else is more or less percentages of the balance.
Oh, I got you. Yeah.
And you know, those numbers are still fuzzy, and then what's in the sub-pools within that are still yet to be determined.
Yeah, I mean, we feel pretty comfortable with the numbers that are up here. These come from CDOT allocation. You know, they might change just marginally, but for the most part, we feel very comfortable with the numbers.
Unless there's other discussion germane to the motion, I submit we sound like we're probably ready for a vote on the motion as it stands. I'm sorry, Commissioner Hilbert.
Yeah, it is germane to the motion. But I would like to go back to Councilman Robbins' point here. Shoot, I'm having a brain. Sorry there. To Robbins' point, and that is, I just want to make sure I understand this, is that does the motion, as it's worded, preclude us from establishing the pools at a later point, and that what we've done is made the determination we're keeping everything the same as it is going forward?
The chair rules it does not preclude.
Okay, thank you.
Further discussion on the motion? Hearing none, all those in favor, please indicate by saying aye. Aye. Are there any opposed? There are none. That passes unanimously. Thank you. We now turn to the item that we know will take a bit of time here, but we rest assured you will be out of here by 6 p.m. at the absolute latest. The agenda item number 8, relative to the developing, the topic being developing the next transportation improvement program. It's found as attachment F in your packet. You will note that there are 3 segments to this, and I have asked staff to present these to you one at a time. They are related, and there is some dependence on one to the other. But I think just to help us understand and process it better, we will, in the first instance, begin with excuse me, the discussion item Metro Vision Strategic Corridors. And we have the recommendation of a number of people this evening who've already anticipatorily spoken on this. Commissioner Rozier, former Commissioner Tour, have already addressed this issue. It is back before you again, in effect, because there has been some confusion, and we wanted to give this committee the opportunity, having had some of this information distilled, to clarify that there is no legal basis, no statutory mandate, no regulatory mandate, no definitional provision for the use of the word strategic as we have used it in this mapping, and that in fact previously we did not have identification of quote-unquote strategic corridors. I say quote-unquote because it's not a defined term and it is not mandated by any existing law. And the recommendation is simply to remove references to the phrase strategic corridors. I think, just to clarify, it's not a question of removing what you might consider in your own mind to be a strategic corridor. It's to remove a reference to the phrase strategic corridors. We're not here trying to label these things. In the TIP's scoring criteria and reallocation of points. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Doug.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. And again, that was fabulous. I don't know if I can explain it much better than that, but but there really has been, I think most would agree, that there was a lot of discussion about strategic corridors through this process, and there has been some frustration and confusion about exactly what that is. At the last meeting, for example, we were asked to, we tried to come up with a definition of what that was, and there's really, as the chairman suggested, there's just no historical definition. We're not real clear about the true history of what the strategic corridors currently were. It wasn't consistent with any adopted map of corridors. And when the decision was made by MBIC to retain the strategic corridors, staff attempted to at least match that up with a board adopted map that was to provide that consistency. And we chose our regional roadway system, in particular projects that were or roadways that were major arterial and above. And then so basically the discussion seemed to indicate to us that the MVIC really placed value in higher level facilities. And we internally we met again to talk about specifically about strategic corridors and what role and what place it might have, and we really believed in the outcome that strategic corridors, the projects that are on strategic corridors, are going to score well with or without the strategic corridor definition. Railway projects, for example, they will score well under the congestion criterion, or the crash reduction criterion, or the long-range plan criterion. So there's several that gives higher level facilities maybe a built-in advantage. I'll probably just stop there. So as a result of that, it's our recommendation that and ask you to re-explore the elimination of strategic corridors as a criterion for use in the TIP, and if that is indeed your wish, to then have a discussion now at a future meeting about the allocation of those points, those 4 points that are dedicated to strategic corridors.
All right, let me identify Mayor Pro Tem Malay.
Not to prevent discussion, but I am just going to move to recommend the elimination of the strategic corridor map.
We have a motion. Is there a second? Sure. There's a second by Councilor Jones. Any further discussion on the motion? Any further discussion on the motion? Commissioner Rozier, you want to do an attaboy on that?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. No. I am going to use this opportunity. I'm not going to take a position on this motion because of legal grounds that we're on, but I just wanted to say a few things, get a few things off my chest here, and that is, when last time MVIC met, I wasn't here, Arvada wasn't here, others weren't here, and the issue to bring up and specifically pull out and point to Jefferson Parkway, I find appalling, because we are here today, we are here every day, whether in MVIC or DRCOG, working as a regional, Denver Regional Council of Governments. And when we don't view regional significant projects, when we say, okay for us, not good for you, it gets me going. And looking at the notes, listening to the testimony that was given, and knowing why we're all here, I'm just shocked and amazed. at the actions that were taken and what went on. There was discussion on a tenuous agreement. There's nothing tenuous about it. It's black and white. It's a very specific IGA between Jefferson County, the City of Boulder, and Boulder County on Jefferson Parkway. This was included in 2010 as a strategic corridor to specifically identify one segment to be removed is in direct violation of agreements that we have. And it takes away from that collaborative working agreement that we all come here to do. I just wanted to get it out. I find it very interesting that this was brought out when the major stakeholders weren't here, without even a phone call before it was presented to any of those stakeholders. Without any discussion, it was being presented. Without any follow-up. How is that collaborative? And I hope that doesn't occur going forward. Thank you.
And if the chair can just take a minute to expand upon that and thank Commissioner Rozier for his comments, because there are concerns, and it's appropriate and important that people have the opportunity to express themselves as they are felt. There is nothing in this motion that is intended to address, impact, affect, or in any way compromise or diminish any agreements or any functioning as exist relative to any of the streets or roadways that are depicted or not depicted in any map. The issue here is a staff issue of a ministerial nature to clarify language, and the record will so reflect, to clarify language that is not defined and is not legally provided for. And that is the only intent behind this particular motion. And Commissioner Rozier has used the opportunity appropriately, and we appreciate, to address a broader question. And we, as I say, appreciate that. But just for the sake of this record, this is a narrow motion and a narrow question, and really is intended as such. Mayor Cernanek.
Yes, I wanted to appreciate Don for his comments on that side, so we have a chance to share some of that. But I do have a question. If we don't have a definition for strategic corridors, yet what we're looking at, and this to some extent my comments go back to how we were dealing with regionally significant and went through the board exercise. So if we don't have a definition for strategic corridors, what's our definition for regionally significant?
I'm going to let Executive Director answer that question, because that's exactly the question I asked her before the meeting, because I had focused in on the phrase strategic that is used earlier on in, I believe it was, significant, regionally significant in attachment C, and was informed that that particular phrase is a federally mandated phrase that is defined by and required by applicable federal law.
I'm glad I stepped in it.
Strategic is not. I'm sorry, did you want to supplement?
No, you're really good. Would you like a job? Chair has said it quite well. Regionally significant is a federal term of art. There is a federal definition for regionally significant, and the best way to explain it, or the quickest, shortest way to explain it, is a mile of pavement. That's considered regionally significant. That project has to be in the regional transportation plan and approved by the MPO. Strategic corridor is a DRCOG term of art. So, or in art. Yeah, thank you, Doug. to kind of refresh everyone's memory, what happened at MVIC was staff originally said, yeah. Oh, okay. So we don't need to go back through that then. So, but basically, your motion, long and short of it, your motion at the last meeting when you discussed this was what you really put on that map were major arterials and higher, freeways, tollways, and rapid transit. Well, those all have definitions. We all know what those are. Before, the definition was lines on a map, some of them connected, some of them not. We tried to fill in the gaps. That caused problems. So what you, the map that you came up with, basically at the last, we're basically saying you don't need a map, because what you said were strategic corridors or things that already have a definition and are actually based on maps and definitions you have in your plans already. Again, major arterials and higher, and rapid transit. So we suggest you don't need a map, and we don't need to have this discussion about, or we don't need to further define it through another map.
I'm sorry, Mayor Noon.
So just to be clear, when last time when we were discussing whether a specific highway should be on it or not, this way we're not really saying that, well, I'm just going to use it, the Jefferson Parkway actually now would be considered as equal to anything else?
Okay. Let me be very clear about this. No, let me just be very clear about the Jefferson Parkway. You put it in your fiscally constrained plan. It is there today, and it says funded with 100% locally derived funds. So Jefferson County could submit that for funding, but you're not going to pay for it, I would assume, because that's not the way it's in the plan. You can't put transit, for example, on a non-existing facility either. So again, I think that we don't have to even talk about existing, particularly when it relates to the Parkway, because of how it's represented in the plan. It won't be until the Jefferson Parkway exists, that you can put buses on it, let's say, or I don't know, put shoulders on it so that you can have a bike path or something along it.
So basically we're not including or excluding any specific roadways by taking this action?
No.
Mayor Cernanek.
Just to follow on, because I didn't hear the answer to the question. Okay, so regionally significant then, so I'm going to take a shot at it, is going to be something that we determine scores well.
Regionally significant is something that is like, by federal definition, has to be included in your long-range plan. What we're saying is major arterials and higher and rapid transit score well because they have a lot of congestion, because they have a lot of connections, because they're used very highly during the weekdays, during during the peak hours. Those are why we're saying that those kinds of projects are going to do well regardless, just by the nature of what those projects are. And they're generally very multimodal in nature, or they have a lot of multimodal connections. I'm still not getting it. I can see I'm not hitting it.
I'm trying to get to a simple level of as we explain this in going through, to say, hey, we're dealing with regionally significant projects, and what that means is we've gone through the development of a scoring system, and regionally significant are those projects that score well.
No, because, well, maybe a regionally significant project by federal rules has to be in the plan. That doesn't mean it scores well necessarily. It just means that it has to be in the plan. You had a map that talked about strategic corridors. And when the map was all said and done, the map that you agreed on were major arterials and above and rapid transit. Those do score well because of the nature of those projects. Maybe, go ahead, Robin.
I was going to
interpret me.
I was going to try to help. I think so just to go really, really basic. So we're talking about two different ball games completely, right? We're there. Okay. The regionally significant projects only get scored to get on the fiscally constrained plan. That's, I think, the piece that's missing. So, Phil, you can have every regionally significant project, whether it scores well or scores poorly, has to be in the RTP. Those that score well float to the top and they get in the fiscally constrained piece. So the regionally significant is either a yes or a no. It's in or an out. There is no gradation, right? The only gradation occurs on whether you get into fiscally constrained or not. How about that? Does that help?
Yeah, it's project versus system what we're talking
But the question was what's
It's like you're either pregnant or you're not. You're either regionally significant or you're not.
I think the question is how do you define?
How does the federal
the
government?
federal definition of regionally significant?
Happy?
Yeah.
Yeah. How do they define it? Is there a definition?
All right. If I can bring some order back to this, does staff have a comment that will facilitate the determination of the motion? We still have two other segments to this agenda item to get through. And I know it's an important one, and that's why we're taking the time and not trying to rush the discussion. This motion just is to remove all references to strategic corridors in the TIP scoring criteria and reallocate the points therefrom for the reasons as stated. Now, is there a staff comment that can add further elucidation to that point?
You want to go with me?
I believe so.
Then please take it away,
Let me
Steve.
take this. We're mixing up the regional roadway system. Oh, I'm sorry. The regional roadway system, which has been adopted by the DOR. It's just a system of roads. So it doesn't matter how many lanes or whatever. It's a road map. The Rand McNally, those who remember way back when we had paper maps. It's a road map of the key roads that the board adopted. They're we label as principal arterials in blue, major regional arterials in yellow, and freeways/tollways, limited access facilities in red. 10, 15 years ago, the board said, you know what, as part of this TIP, 2001 TIP, let's call some of these strategic. And just came up, magic markers, and labeled some of these as strategic with no real reason to do it or anything. We came and said, this time, 10 years later, those strategic definitions, and that's literally a highlighter on some of these roads, didn't really mean anything.
May I? I'm going to, point of inquiry on the part of the chair. The point is that, as I understand what you are saying, there was no definition of strategic. There was merely a depiction of strategic. And that is what has caused confusion, angst, concern, and the point now of the motion would be to eliminate that because there is no definition of strategic. There was merely a depiction of strategic. And to say there were no reasons behind it, there may have been many reasons. It's simply that they were not recorded, not put down, are not available for our further consideration. That's my question. Am I correct?
That is absolutely
Thank
correct.
you for answering the question. Did you have anything else that you wanted to add? Or?
The only other thing is regionally, now I'm going to hit yours, regionally significant projects. So right now we're not talking about projects. This is just a system definition. Regionally significant projects is a federal requirement, and that is the one that whenever projects come forward, it's designated as regionally significant. Basically, if it's a mile or more of new pavement, All right, it can be a widening project, or it can be a new road. A new road or a widening project on this system up here. All right, so if it's a mile long, it's regionally significant, we must show it in the fiscally constrained plan before it's eligible for the tip. A new interchange is also regionally significant. So there's been various new interchanges put in over the years. That would be regionally significant. And then the only other type of thing and rapid transit lines are regionally significant. And the only other type of thing would be a major interchange reconstruction would be regionally significant. So something like C-470 at Santa Fe, putting that big flyover in. That was regionally significant, which required our fiscally constrained plan to have a dot on the map that said regionally significant.
Thank you, Steve. We appreciate that. Is there any further discussion, or are you ready for a vote? Are we ready for a vote? Sounds like we're ready for a vote. All right, and we'll do this in 3 parts. All those in favor, please indicate by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed, please indicate similarly.
No.
And there's 1 no. Are there any abstentions? Commissioner Rozier is noted as an abstention. Commissioner Hilbert is noted as a no vote. The balance, and I'm sorry, and Mayor Noon is also a no. All right, thank you. So we have 2 no's. We have a majority in favor. We have 2 opposed, and we have 1 abstention, as I have noted for the record. And Connie will make appropriate countings to make sure that's all right. That resolves item number 1 under our agenda, item number 8. I now turn to item number 2. This is the designation of funding levels for set-aside programs. So I think it addresses to some extent questions that Councilor Kanish and others had asked relative to the TIP program as we have on the slide up here. And because this one definitely is above my pay grade, I'm just going to turn it over to the other Doug to walk us through item number 2.
I was really hoping you were going to say something. Yeah, and really what we're going to talk about right now is this box right here. And this is the set-aside program that we have in our current CIP. Excuse me. And previously, this committee has endorsed the concept of maintaining the practice of set-asides. And discussed evaluating opportunities for additional set-asides as well. So we have recommendations for you. Staff recommendations are on page 2 of this agenda item. It's about halfway down the page here. And what I might do, if it pleases the committee, is just to step through each one of these because we have modified some of the existing set-asides, and we're also including a new one as well. Excuse me. All righty. The first one that's listed here is the regional TDM set-aside. We're proposing $1.6 million per year to be set aside with targets. $560,000 for regional partnership TMAs, $640 for traditional TDM marketing, and $400 for something new. Which is multimodal supportive infrastructure, such as last mile, that has been brought up in this committee several times. Excuse me. And the whole purpose of this set-aside is really, to maximize and really market the transportation system of our existing system. And this is a long-standing. We've had this as a set-aside for many TIF cycles. And like I said, the only difference between this one and the last one, this is increased by $400,000. That's to accommodate the multimodal supportive infrastructure component that's included in here. And again, that was something that was requested for discussion by this committee previous. Mr. Chairman, I don't know if we want to take comments or questions one by one, or.
Relative, no. I think better that you hit them all.
Okay.
Better that we have all of these set out at one time by you, and then because there may not be questions on some of them, then questions can be asked following that. So we're just going to have him discuss, and then we'll allow questions.
Great, thank you, sir.
Mayor Pro Tem?
I'm sorry. So if I have a question about this specific regional TDM, you want me to wait till you've discussed the other set-asides before I ask the question on the regional TDM? Is that?
I think let's just get
okay,
them all
that's
on
fine.
the table is my thought. Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you. The second one that's listed here is the Regional Traffic Signal System and ITS set-aside, or Intelligent Transportation System. This is basically the same as last year, the last time. The difference is that we combined the two programs together. We did have a discussion with, this was discussed with the Regional Transportation Operations Work Group, which is made up of your members, of your staff, and they like the concept because it does provide flexibility that probably wasn't in the program before. It allows them to really, they don't have to reapply for a project if they applied for the traffic signal program and it wasn't accepted, they don't have to reapply for the ITS. So it just, for tracking purposes as well, it just made sense to everybody. So we're recommending that. And again, if I didn't say that funding amount, it's virtually the same as what it was last time. The third one is Station Area Master Plan and Urban Center Planning Study set-asides. This is less than last time per year, but is what staff and Brad is here if we have specific questions about this, but is what we felt is left on the table to do with regards to these stamps studies. So staff felt that like that was an appropriate number for a set-aside in the next TIP. The fourth one is the DRCOG Way to Go program, and as you know, this is our regional rideshare program, and that dollar value is exactly the same as what it was in the previous TIP. Last but certainly not least is the air quality set-aside, and this is a new set-aside. In previous TIPs, these projects were part of the call for projects. And the idea of creating this set-aside had been discussed at previous NVIC meetings. So, why did we decide to set the air quality program separate? It's because it's very unique, very specialized projects, and we felt that it just better fit if we could look at them all together in a separate set-aside as opposed to going through the call for projects, because quite frankly, it's very difficult to score and comparatively rank these projects. So we felt it would be best if we included them as their own set-aside. Specifically, the $1.2 million, the first item, there's targets $1.2 million for fleet technology, and that's a tremendous opportunity for our local governments to update fleets and school buses and refuse haulers and the like. This is money that RAC has typically administered anyway, and what we are proposing with this one set-aside is for RAC to administer, because they're obviously the resident experts in this, but of course they will be collaborating with DRCOG staff and the like excuse me, to come up with the projects. The second item that's included in there, we have this 1.2 target for vehicle fleet technology. The second item is our long-standing Ozone Aware program, which is also administered by RAC. And the third item is $200,000 target for local projects such as sweepers and de-icers, which is open now, which is eligible now under the call for projects in the current TIP, but we felt that us in collaboration with RAC can select those projects, and in turn ultimately will bring those back to you for your final approval.
That constitutes staff's summary of staff's recommendation relative to the $10 million recommended for allocation amongst the 5 projects as indicated, one of which is new, the last one, most of which are the carry forward of dollar amounts used in the prior TIP. Do we have questions for staff? I think Mayor Pro Tem Millay, did you have a question?
I guess generally the budgets that have been assigned to each of these set-asides have based on historically what they've gotten. Is that accurate?
Correct, yes.
Okay.
Right.
That's
Mayor Sarnanek?
If we move ahead with this, just want to get a point of clarification. We are not determining these allocations tonight as a specific recommendation. What we're doing is establishing a set-aside pool that might have these criteria in it. But the specific projects, our motion will not carry forward a recommendation on the funding at these levels for the projects, because, at least in my opinion, we're sadly missing information to be able to evaluate that.
Well, the answer is, of course, yes and no. For certain pools or certain set-asides, we are setting aside specifically for programs, such as the Way to Go program, for example. We're setting aside money specifically for the administration and the components of that program. But for others, such as the last one I mentioned, like for the $200,000 for local projects, such as for sweepers and de-icers and what have you, those projects we are not selecting. Those will be brought back. But the other ones are programs which kind of, that traditionally or historically have just, they're programs and they run. They're not specific projects.
Chair, if I may, it looks like you're busy. Can I?
Yes.
So, Phil, it's my understanding, yes, we're setting aside $10 million. We're not sure what the specific projects in each of these pools are going to be, but this is the total value in that set-aside program pot. And that's why I asked the question, are these based on the historic funding levels? And staff responded, yes, these are based on, generally on historic funding levels. So, yes, we are going to be moving forward with a recommendation, $10 million divided up amongst these set-aside programs as presented here, but we're not going to know specifically what projects are being funded.
We have a great sign that's going around our city center. It has, that's the way we've always done it, and it has a big red circle with an X through it.
That having been said, one must always profit from what history has taught one so that one is not condemned to repeat it. So we do have, good and bad out of using history as a basis.
Chairman?
Yes.
If I may just clarify. I mean, most of what you see here will come back, with the exception of the DRCOG Way to Go program itself. But the other stuff will come back because there are only targets that we set, like for the regional TDM set aside. Those are targets for those specific programs that we're discussing. So those individual projects will come back to this committee, and ultimately will be approved by the board.
Chrissy, did you have?
Thanks, Doug, for the information and clarification on a lot of these things. I did have a couple of questions, one being big picture and then a couple of more specific. And so I guess the big picture question, which I have on all of the bullet points here, is how are we reporting out the values or the measures on all these things, just to make sure that we're spending money wisely and it's helping us to reach our goals and that these are effective. So that's something that I'd like to see more of. I know it's come up in other conversations, and I think it's important for us to keep in mind as we move forward. And then two other questions that might be a little bit more specific and you might not be able to answer today. So that's part of my question, is this, where are we in the process? So on the regional TDM and the TMAs, with this funding that we're considering setting aside, does that also define the eligibility in terms of project sponsors and how that works and the types of projects, or is that conversation still to come? And then specifically on the stationary master plan and urban center planning study set aside, does that also include next step studies?
Well, to answer your question about the eligibility, no, that's yet to come.
Okay.
Well, I should have written down all those questions, but the performance measures?
Yeah.
Yeah, I might refer to our TIP historian on some of that, but I know for certain programs, certainly on the TDM side, that there are performance measures, and they do report out on the effectiveness of those programs. On the other programs, Steve, I don't know.
Yeah, and I guess part of my question too is they report out on the individual projects, but one of the things I've been talking with the TMAs that are in Denver is they're all doing things that in theory are helping us reach more regional goals, whether it's the city of Denver or the DRCOG region as a whole. So taking the parts and looking at the whole at the same time and telling that story.
Right. Yes.
Other discussion? sorry, other discussion? Yes, Councilor Johnson.
Well, I was going to say to Mr. Saranac that if he didn't want to do things the way they were, if it was up to us, and I'm sure I already know how this is going to go over, we would increase funding for this set-aside. So if you want to change, we'd be happy to go that direction, because this is very, very important in our neck of the woods.
Does that constitute a motion for approval?
Yes.
Second.
All right, we have a motion by Commissioner Jones and a second by Mayor Pro Tem Millet to approve staff recommendation as indicated and discussed. Is there discussion on the motion? If not, are you ready to vote? If so, all those in favor, please indicate by saying aye. Aye. Are there any opposed? I hear none opposed. That passes unanimously. Thank you. We turn to the third point under agenda item number 8, which is the guidance to staff on revisions to eligibility and evaluation criteria for each TIP project type. And relative to, we had a comment, I know, from I believe it was the Thornton traffic engineer, Mr. Putnam, about the roadway capacity projects as one example. We have talked about the fact that if you look at page 3 of the memorandum, the direct air quality improvement project type, we've already addressed that by virtue of establishing that in item number 2 above that we just voted on. But we do have various eligibility criteria, scoring instructions, and so forth that are presented. MVIC will, in May, be asked to make a recommendation on the staff proposed revised criteria, because we've done some revision to those criteria this evening, and specifically staff would now like some guidance on what they call the following general assumptions as found on page 3. So if you would look to your materials on page 3, just to go through those, we want to get a feedback from the committee to help direct staff. That is, how do you feel about increasing the points, that is the ones that we freed up from the other deleted criteria, for technical and measurable aspects of project type? Secondly, how about retaining the environmental justice criteria for each project type? Obviously less of a measurable one because it's a little more amorphic. Third, increase the multimodal connectivity points that are given for roadway projects and add criteria for additional types of bike ped facilities. Fourth, the roadway capacity projects. The question is only if they're eligible for NEPA approval already having been signed or expected to be signed. Then roadway reconstruction projects, eligible only if the calculated pavement condition index is 40 or lower, in other words, in bad shape. Next comment, following two project types no longer be scored, but instead would be considered in the second phase selection, the phase 2 selection process that you see up on the chart. And that would be other enhancement projects such as streetscapes and so forth, and transportation studies. And then the last comment, as I said, we've already effectively addressed by virtue of the approval of item number 2. Those are the various points as to which staff would like some direction. Doug, do you have any further amplification on that, or would you just like to open up for discussion by the board, by the committee?
No, thank you very much, sir. You've summed it up rather well, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
All right. I saw Mayor Horn's hand first, and then Councilor Vigil.
So I'd just like to build on Jean's comments earlier on the NEPA disclosure document. I understand that that's really a conundrum, because if you don't have that, that can take a lot of time, and so we don't want to dedicate money if we don't know what that outcome could be. But it also has an expiration date to it, and so if you spend the money and there's not going to be the money for the next step of the project, you're out the money. It expires and you have to start again. It's a dog chasing its tail, because either solution, I mean, I don't know if there is a solution. It may be a circle, but that's a concern to me. We have one project, and if we go through the NEPA process, it's unlikely to be funded, and yet we can't qualify unless we do. I don't know what the answer to that is.
Well, I can.
Sorry, yeah, Doug, can you please respond?
Thanks, sir, very much. I mean, I would like to clarify. I think I can provide some clarification for that NEPA bullet. And really, this is something that came out of our 2012 certification review, our federal certification review, and quite frankly, the language that we're considering, and we'd like for you all to consider, is actually less stringent than what is currently in our documentation. Currently, where is it here? Currently within our documentation, it states that NEPA documentation must be submitted on or before the date of TIF submittal. And we work with FHWA to come up with more lenient language that suggests that NEPA documentation can be submitted any time through the cycle of the TIP to provide that information.
Okay.
And so how long is each cycle?
Well, it's the 4 years of the TIP.
Okay, because those NEPA certifications are generally multi-year deals. So
I think the point that staff is making is this is what we're asking for and suggesting, and what they want your comment on is a step down from what we currently have, which is on or before the date of TIP submittal. There has to be NEPA document signed, disclosure document signed. I think that's what I hear staff saying.
And I appreciate that. I'm not sure it solves the problem, but I get that it's more lenient.
But I believe the point is that we're dealing with a federal mandate relative to
That's correct.
these. And so we have to have something to comply with the federal mandate. We're looking at language that may be a step down from the more restrictive language that we currently operate under. I think we're just trying to look for how far can we push that envelope.
Right. And we can certainly have those conversations. I mean, we feel for the member entities that have to submit certainly NEPA documentation. Anyone who's gone through it knows. But there are certain requirements, and we would be happy to maybe table this section and reevaluate and talk to the Fed some more about this and bring it back and be part of what we present to you next time.
Okay. Councilor Cahill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I guess my suggestion was going to be that that we strike out the words "has already been signed" or, and then so that the roadway capacity projects are eligible only if the NEPA disclosure document is expected to be signed within the TIP cycle.
But what if
And
you happen to have already done it? You don't want to cut yourself out there.
No, but what this one is saying up in here is that you can't even apply unless you have that NEPA signed already.
Well,
that's what the
I
current
believe
says.
that it's an either or, and it's intended to be expansive in the use of the word "or" there. That it is either you have it signed or it is reasonably anticipated that you will in fact have it. So I think that is intended to be expansive, not limiting.
I got you.
As I understand it. Councilor Jones.
Just two quick questions, and then we have to scram. We have a big
right.
Chamber of Commerce event tonight that we're late for. That first one about increasing points, is that just for the first phase project?
Yes, it is.
Okay, great. And then second, I guess at the last one about direct air quality improvement projects, our staff had a question: how would a non-RAC AQ project be funded? And the suggestion was to make that part of phase 2. So, I just wanted to
depending on what type of project we're talking about, but because we took action on the set-asides on the previous deal, that would be part of that call, that $200,000 we have set aside.
even if it's a
target.
non-RAC project.
Well, I think those are representing non-RAC projects.
Yeah,
Those are local projects.
The set-aside is dealing with the RAC, and the direct air quality improvement was the RAC stuff too, correct?
So if you had
we're not- we're not- if
non-RAC
basic-
project,
I'm sorry?
so I guess my question is, if you have a non-RAC project, a non-RAC air quality project, how could you get it funded?
I'm sorry, I missed the last part of what you said.
If you had a non-RAC air quality project, where would you get it funded? And is that in phase two?
In the 200,000 portion of RAC, that RAC 200,000 that you approved earlier.
Even if it's a non-RAC
Yes.
air quality project?
The 200,000 for RAC is for local projects that would be submitted.
Excellent. Well, then, this is great, and we strongly support all the multimodal connectivity stuff.
And bear in mind, ladies and gentlemen, that what this is a suggested list that staff is going to bring back to you prior to our May 7th meeting. So please do understand, this is not a question of writing this in stone. They're now going to take the input from this meeting and put it into their proposed changes to come back to you. I have Commissioner Hilbert, and I have Mayor Pro Tem Millay.
I do have a question on the when we look at the criteria and we look at NEPA, and as we go through doing a NEPA and EIS study, it is my understanding that certain criteria must be addressed when you're doing a NEPA and an EIS. It's going to lead to my question. And one of those is environmental justice. I thought you have to address and resolve environmental justice issues at the NEPA and EIS level. So why are we assigning points to environmental justice criteria when you have to, by federal law, at least I was always understood you did, address the environmental justice issues? And so my recommendation, one thing to look at is moving those points and just increase points even more, taking that off as a criteria, keeping to the keep it simple basis here. Because at NEPA, you have to address those anyway. So Rex, help me here. Steve?
Well, I can. In our 2008 certification review, our federal partners asked us to have a stronger connection between EJ and our project selection, and that's why it was put in there. So we came to you just to confirm that that's the process you wanted us to continue.
Okay. It's a federal request. I get
Yes,
that. I understand, and I understand the connection, but I just think that the MVIC needs to understand there are very few areas out there that qualify for EJ, for environmental justice points, period. And so whatever those are, they should be very minimal, because I just think it's an unfair category to get double dipped. I have to resolve it when I have it, but then I don't have enough points to get for it because I don't have an EA. I can guarantee you right now, if you don't have a university or college, you just ain't going to get a whole lot of EAJA points, quite frankly. I'm just going to tell you. So that's my whole point, is that I would really like you to look at that. Fine if we got to meet the federal criteria, but I think we should push it down, and then we can move the rest of the points up. Thank you.
Mayor Pro Tem Millay.
I'm not really clear on what increase the multimodal connectivity points of roadway projects and add criteria for additional types of bike pedestrian facilities. Could you give me an example of what that is?
Sure. Well, as far as the points go,
I understand.
Okay.
Just give me an example of what I understand points, but
yeah, it was really just to really freshen the document up with more today's terminology with regards to certain bike stuff. And I actually have a red line version that we're currently working on that I could probably grab here real quick.
May I suggest, if you have a red line version that you're working on, and that's going to come back to us at the MVIC meeting in May for further consideration when we have the opportunity of having studied it prior to the meeting and have some considered advice available from our staff, if we have staff, then we could have a more informed discussion than sort of doing this on the fly. My question to the group is, are there any specific comments that any member of the committee would like to make that would help staff steer away from a particular topic that you're concerned about, or as Commissioner Hilbert did, to kind of add some clarity to it? Mayor Pro Tem.
I guess that's what I tried to do, Chair, in asking my question, because I'm not sure I'm giving guidance that I think this is a good idea, and I wanted to say whether I agreed with what staff was doing and the direction they were going, or I didn't agree. And since I wasn't allowed to hear the answer to my question, I can't give the guidance.
I apologize. God forbid that it ever be stated I didn't allow the answer to the question. So, Doug, to the extent that you can remember the question, if you would please provide a more full
Are you going to be
response.
adding points if a roadway project now includes a bike path or next to it? You're going to give the roadway project more points? Is that what this is saying?
Well, yes, basically. I mean, we are
So
suggesting
I
to
feel
include
like
additional.
Okay, so in the guidance section, then I'm a little concerned that I've got to spend the money to put a bike path in to get my roadway project to get more points. And so giving direct guidance, I don't think that that's a good idea.
Right. Well, okay.
That's the reason for the dialogue, is so that we have. That's right. Exactly. No, I know. I appreciate it. And I think it is so noted in the record now. Mayor Cernanek.
Yes, the first bullet point is looking at those technical and measurable aspects.
Yes, sir.
Even though they may be downstream from a project, but giving those things, I would say any points that we have available, those end up being explainable because we can say, hey, those are working towards regional goals that are going to be measurable. They may not be. We may ask a technical review committee at some point in time to be able to weigh in on if somebody is estimating some of those and looking at a professional group to temper that to make sure that what we're getting. But anything that we have that I can easily explain, or
Yes.
anyone around the table can easily explain, that those are going directly at regional objectives.
Yes.
Exactly. Commissioner Hilton.
Yeah, could you please roll that back up, please? Thank you. This is the thing, you guys, you've heard me talk about over and over, and I'm just going to point it out, and Jackie did so very eloquently. I understand exactly what you're doing. This is the point right here in the multimodal connection thing. I think we need to be careful, and why I really hope staff looks at this a lot. Because look at the points. Yep. This is where you game a system, and this is where you put improvements in places that shouldn't have them, and we take money away from the whole pool to game the system to get the points that have no achievable benefit as a result that net of it. Okay? I can cite examples. I won't. But this is...
Oh, please do, Jack.
This is... I don't want to, believe me. But the point being is that this is the stuff, this incremental, if you start adding those up to meet that, all of a sudden I get 25, 30 points for working that. And we got to figure out a way to achieve, I understand what it does, but when you're trying to use the monies, which are very minimal to begin with, wisely, and somebody has to throw $1 million worth of that in there to get a project scored, and then they get it scored because they got that in there, and then you've got a bus bench where only cows graze. I mean, that's the kind of stuff I'm talking about. So anyhow, there's my point. Let's be careful here, Rex, and look at that closely.
I think we've had some informed and passionate expressions that help staff understand better. And if you have a comment, please.
I do. Thank you, sir, very much. Just to wrap this up, what we're proposing, we will be sending you out the red line version, and we appreciate the conversation and discussion about this today. I know it's a long night. And we're going to get this out to you no less than 2 weeks before the next meeting, so you can have a discussion with staff, with your local staffs about it as well. So, because we all know they're the ones that are filling out this application, and I'm sure they want input. Thank you, sir.
We appreciate that. I think that is very, very helpful in terms of giving us some guidance and direction for staff to follow as they go forward. And this does not end the discussion in 2 ways. First of all, between now and the next meeting, please feel free to contact staff and share your thoughts, ideas, reactions. Number 2, it will come back to you in the May meeting after you have seen in advance the draft changes that staff is working on now. So you will have ample resources and time for looking at it. Turning now to agenda item number 9, that information will be provided to you at the April 16th board meeting. So we do not need to have discussion of that this evening. We thank Brad Calvert very much for being ready, willing, and able to provide some of that information to us now, but that information will be provided to us at the regular full board meeting. And unless there is further business, please pass your name tags down to assist staff in cleaning up. We appreciate that. Unless there is further business, I will adjourn my meeting, and the next time you'll have Chairman Elise Jones back. Thank you all.